Howdy, I heard you like videos. If you're not already watching on YouTube, you should toddle on over to YouTube and you should subscribe to Post-Mortem Video, all one word, and you should click subscribe, and you should click the little bell, and you should select all when you click the little bell, and whatever other hoops that YouTube now has you jump through in order to actually be subscribed. Basically, subscribe to my YouTube channel. So, we have victory, apparently, over Wizards of the Coast, and people apparently care what I have to say about the whole thing. I don't think we can trust them, even now, and like a lot of people, I think we're all sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop on all this. It's a temporary victory, but their goals are still the same, and if anything, the pressure upon Wizards to make more money has grown even more intense since they've screwed everything up. So I doubt that the messaging from on high will be stop fucking with it. Rather, I suspect the messaging from on high will be find a way to fuck with it that won't immediately set off the entire community. So I'm curious to see how things develop over this year and maybe next year. I think the big test will be what happens with 1D&D and whether that is released under an open license, whether it genuinely is backwardly compatible, because with the position that they're in now, if 1D&D is fully backward compatible with 5th edition D&D, then everyone's just going to be able to reverse engineer it, whether it is open or not, and create compatible products, whether that is still their intention or not. So one would have to imagine that this would create pressure upon 1D&D to be less compatible or more dependent upon the virtual tabletop or tools that they create in-house, to the extent that you can't really play it any other way. One would imagine that would be the direction in which the pressure would go. I still think their best option would be just simply to create the best three-dimensional virtual tabletop that they can in order to win share back from other platforms. Of course, it's likely that they will only support D&D on their platform, which means that the third-party platforms will still have a place, and if they still allow the third-party virtual tabletops to incorporate D&D, then they'll basically be able to keep going somewhat of the same audience they have now. Switching platforms is always a pain in the ass for people. So we'll see, but that will stifle the growth of third-party virtual tabletops. So, yeah, there is that. To me, it seems obvious that what they should do is that. To make the game open, maintain it as open, keep the compatibility, and really work hard on their virtual tabletop, and maybe even allow it to host other games than D&D. If they could produce resources for science fiction games, cyberpunk games, things like that, so you could just play those in 3 dimensions on there, I think that would have massive appeal and would draw a lot of people. And that would just be competition with the other virtual tabletops. Unfair competition, perhaps, given their relative resources, but at least honest competition, rather than trying to shut people down via the law or whatever. So this is a very quick and dirty video, so excuse pauses for drink and stuff. Right, so I am a second and third order thinker. Most people are just a first order thinker. They think cause and effect, not cause and effect of the effect, and effect of the effect of the effect. My therapist says this is a problem. I'm thinking about the implications moving forward. And while the OGL 1.0a is now safe, and the D&D content within the 5th edition SRD is now safe, having been released in Creative Commons, it's not really safe because we've seen the vulnerability and that question has not actually been answered. So I don't think moving forward many people will use the existing open gaming license unless they have to. And a lot of people will have to because there are a lot of systems that aren't D&D that were released under the OGL 1.0a to the public. And so if you want to use those systems, you have to use that open gaming license, at least until the owners of those systems decide to release them under Creative Commons or ORC or whatever else happens along. So, for example, I use the OpenD6 system in a few of my products. Now, that has been released under the Open Gaming License, and that's what I was using it under. But it has not been released under any other licenses as of yet, and may well not be, since I believe the owner of the property is dead. So that leaves us in something of an awkward position, unless ownership of that system has passed on to someone else who can make the decision to release it under some other license. The other problem, of course, is that we're going to have all manner of different systems released under all manner of different licenses, which makes cross-pollination more difficult. And we still have the issue that rule systems are technically not able to be copyrighted, but that still hasn't been challenged and reinforced in court with specific regard to role-playing games. So what does all this mean? Probably a lot less open content, or certainly at least a lot more hiving off into little small communities for open content within each system and within each license, which isn't good for the ecosystem overall and does reinforce D&D anyway, because the people releasing stuff for D&D will still have to use either the Open Gaming License or the Creative Commons, which has its own issues but is a relatively safe harbour compared to what the OGL seems like now. So it's all a great period of enormous uncertainty and a lot of fracturing and splintering into different areas. I mean, we're still going to get the ORC license, so that's something that will probably be the main one that people come to work together under, and there have been various other initiatives, but it remains to be seen how effective those are going to be. So the next big question, the next second order question, is will people go back to D&D, or has this issue created a permanent shift or change in the market? D&D was currently something like 85% of the total role-playing market. I don't know whether that's just in terms of game books or whether that's in terms of other products and so on as well, which means the rest of us have all been existing in that 15% and maybe overlapping with that 85% a little bit when we release compatible product. So maybe that percentage of the market, that 15%, has doubled, which will seem very good news for the rest of us, but it still leaves D&D extremely dominant over the marketplace. And that's assuming that a lot of people do go back to D&D. I guess we'll see over the next few months. It will depend on probably next month's sales figures, whether people like Paizo or Monte Cook or whatever else can look to those and say, no, this is a more permanent state of affairs. It wasn't just a protest vote against D&D that people bought our products and they then immediately went back once Wizards of the Coast capitulated. So that remains to be seen. I suspect that the non-D&D market has increased, maybe not doubled, maybe it's gone up 5-10%. You know, that's good news for all of us. It's a lot more money for the rest of us, but we'll have to wait and see, I guess. But the big thing is, really, is 1D&D going to be backwards compatible? If it is, they're now screwed because people can reverse engineer and produce content for it without needing to submit to any new license they might create. If they do create some sort of license for 1D&D. I think it's more likely it's going to be a GSL type license, and I don't think people will kick up as much for stink if 1D&D is more restrictive, as opposed to them trying to impose restriction on their entire history. And let's hope that they re-release all the old SRDs under Creative Commons or other licenses now. I think that's a necessary step in regaining people's trust. If 1D&D is not backwards compatible, then they're also screwed in a kind of 4th edition type way, possibly, depending how far it strays from the D&D model, I suppose. Because changing systems, changing editions, it's always a bit of an ask for people. Most people follow along, but it's a matter of speed, and 4th edition showed that some people will not follow along. A lot of people will not follow along if you botch it. And if it's not backwards compatible, which is what they've promised previously, I think that'll just piss a lot of people off, and they'll be more pissed off in the wake of this than they otherwise were. And, 5e has its own issues anyway, regardless. It's very risk-averse. It's not a very threatening system. It's a very sort of safe set of make-believe rules, really. It doesn't particularly offer genuine immersion. I know realism is a silly thing to talk about, particularly in regards with D&D. It's not really an aim of D&D, but you've got to have some verisimilitude in a game, and 5th edition really doesn't particularly have it. And it breaks down especially hard at high levels. But, yeah. Will their VTT allow homebrewing, alternative rule sets, non-D&D games to be hosted there? All that remains to be seen. And the threat with subscribing to a live service is if you do something that annoys them or that causes a social media fuss or whatever, you may well end up banned from the platform and losing everything that you invested in on that platform and those players and all the rest of it. I mean, are they going to allow dungeon masters who charge for their services to be on there, for example, or are they going to demand a cut of that along with everything else? Who knows? All they really have now, after all this fuss, is the quality of their new products, which hasn't been good for quite some time, and the VTT, and a lot will depend on its price point, compatibility, and so forth. Will they let you play older editions on their virtual tabletop? Will it support play with those older editions? Questions, and no answers. It's a period of massive uncertainty. So there was a second thing I wanted to talk about, which probably should be on a separate video, but I'm going to tack it on the end here. Morality clauses. There's still an issue in role-playing more widely, I would say. And in terms of some of the licenses, Orc isn't going to have a morality clause in it exactly, but companies who release SRDs under the Orc may well attach morality things to it. And if you go looking at things like the open license for basic role-playing or Monte Cook's cipher systems requirements, these things still have morality clauses. So while all this was still up in the air a great deal, I wrote to Monte Cook Games and I asked them about this, about the morality clause, because I have concerns as someone who produces what some people disparagingly call edgy content. So this is the reply I got. I'll just read it. Greetings, James. Please accept my apologies for the delayed response. The intent of these conditions is to protect the Cypher System, the community of Cypher System creators, our fans, and Monte Cook Games from people who might try to use the Cypher System to promote repugnant views or agendas. A game that portrays Nazis as the heroes or glorifies paedophilia tarnishes all our reputations and our enjoyment of the game. We're not out to eliminate bad guys from our games. We publish challenging games too. This language has also been part of the creator agreement for the Cypher System Creator Program on DriveThruRPG for years, and hundreds of products later, we haven't had to kick out a single product. Here's the bottom line. If you think your creation might be repugnant to a reasonable person, the Cypher System Open License might not be for you. If you're not worried about that, you're almost certainly fine. warm regards, blah, blah, blah. Now, as a consumer, I don't want to be protected from content. I have my own views about what is repugnant, or damaging, or not for me, but I decide that it's not for me, not that it's not for anyone. And I don't trust anyone else's definition of what constitutes repugnant views or agendas. I find morality clauses to be a repugnant view and a repugnant agenda, right? And a lot of other things that go on. I regard as repugnant, but when I regard something as repugnant, I regard it as not for me and avoid it, and therefore it's nobody's problem but mine, and I don't make it anybody else's problem. But I'm not trying to enforce these morality clauses on anyone else. From my point of view, the repugnant views and agendas are often the ones that are very popular, the kind of things the Twitter mobs get behind. Again, I'm a second and third order thinker. It's a curse. I'm tending to think of the implications of things moving forward. Like, if one transgender person assaults a woman in a toilet, should that ever happen, right? I see that as an individual case. The knee-jerk reaction might be to ban transgender people from using women's toilets at all, ever. But then I'm looking at the second and third order effects in terms of suicides, marginalisation, and so on. Horrible analogy, but you get what I'm talking about. Can we not have Nazis as heroes? There's a game called Dust, in which, while the Third Reich has continued into later years with massive access to alien technology and so on, and is trying to take over the world, it's definitely implied very much in the lore that these are not the Nazis from our world anymore, and that the reason they're trying to take over the world is because they perceive a threat of alien invasion, and so they want to unite the world against that potential threat in the future. So you can represent the Nazis as heroes of necessity within that setting. Would that be allowed? That's a big question. There were internal assassination attempts and schisms within the Nazi Party. People who rejected the worst or wanted to take care of Hitler and his inner circle one way or another. Could you not have a game based around that? These are all open questions. And glorifies paedophilia. Well, that might seem like an extremely clear-cut sort of thing, but is it? Is it really? There was a somewhat notorious game called Bliss Stage some time ago, during this first sort of bloom of indie games, in which you played perilously young people piloting mecha who were kind of empowered by their sexual shenanigans and things that went on. Is that allowed? And was somewhat celebrated at the time, and ironically the people who were criticising things like that were people like Pundit. What about a realistic historical RPG where people were often married off at 9, 10, 11, 12 and were expected to consummate the marriage? Is that allowed? Can we play Pendragon or not? Or a modern European RPG, because in Europe the rules around sex are often a lot more lax. The age of consent is often lower, sometimes quite a bit lower. So if I just represent the world as it is, am I going to get in trouble? And I know that technically that's ephebophilia, but no one gives a damn. Alright, that's pedantry. What is a reasonable person? I think I'm a reasonable person, and I can see a big open gap in a lot of things that I would find perfectly acceptable that other people wouldn't, but I don't regard those as reasonable people. I mean, we live in a world where people are making comparisons between orcs and black people, where even the term race is considered politically incorrect, where a race of Brunesque flying monkeys that have been uplifted out of their natural state is somehow seen as a parable for the enslavement of Africans. Right? These are not reasonable positions to come to. These are not reasonable arguments, but they're popular ones that have led to change within the role-playing hobby. So, what is a reasonable person? I don't think a reasonable person is someone who loses their mind at nothing in that way. And in the UK, reasonable person is a genuine legal standard. I don't know that it is in the US and other places. So, I just don't know. The only way to find out is to test these things, and that is risky. Which is why I'm releasing Rape Lords of Fuckhampton School Kids Edition next month. Not really. Zang.
In the worlds before Monkey, primal chaos reigned. Heaven sought order, but the phoenix can fly only when its feathers are grown. The four worlds formed again and yet again, as endless eons wheeled and passed. Time and the pure essences of heaven, the moisture of the earth, the powers of the sun and moon, all worked upon a certain rock, old as creation, and it became magically fertile. That first egg was named Thought. The God Buddha, the Father Buddha said, "With our thoughts we make the world." Elemental forces caused the egg to hatch. From it then came a stone monkey, and the nature of monkey was irrepressible.
Irrepressible is a simple RPG of fortune cookie wisdom and martial arts, taken from Journey to the West. You can buy it at lulu.com, post-mort.com, and drive-through RPG.